The cold has a way of preserving silence. In the winter of 1957, Philadelphia carried a silence so deep that it seemed to bury its own secrets beneath the frost. On an empty roadside, surrounded by barren trees and brittle wind, a small cardboard box waited like an unspoken confession. Inside it lay a young boy, nameless, stripped of identity, and abandoned without a single witness. No cries for help. No history left to protect him. Only a body that should have been loved, treated instead as disposable. For more than 6 decades, he lived without a name in public memory, known only as the boy in the box. His story became one of America's most disturbing cold cases. A reminder that the darkest truths often hide within ordinary families and ordinary neighborhoods. But in 2022, DNA finally uncovered who he was, raising an even deeper question. Why was he erased? Winter in Philadelphia has a peculiar way of amplifying silence. The cold does not simply bite the skin. It numbs thought, slows movement, and presses its weight on anyone who walks through it. Imagine a road that stretches through a thin patch of woods, with wind slicing against your cheeks like a dull blade. The trees stand bare, their branches crooked like fingers reaching for something they can never reach. There is no traffic, no laughter, no warmth of life. Only the sharp rustling of dry leaves dragged by the wind, scraping against the asphalt in a rhythm that resembles a warning rather than a sound. It feels as if the winter itself is guarding something, as though the landscape refuses to reveal what lies beneath it. It is the kind of silence that suffocates truth, like a thick layer of ice sealing something beneath a frozen lake. The scene is not dramatic. It is still, almost deceptively peaceful. Yet there is an unease in the air, a sense that the world is holding back a secret, waiting for the right moment or the wrong eyes to discover what never should have been found. That secret was a child. He was no more than 4 years old, small enough to be carried easily, yet heavy enough to carry the weight of a tragedy no one had witnessed. When authorities recovered his body, he wore no clothing, as if his identity had been deliberately stripped away. His hair was freshly cut, but crudely, as though someone had rushed to erase any sign of who he used to be. The haircut marked him with a strange duality. It looked both intentional and careless, a gesture that could have been intimate or violent. His thin frame revealed bones too visible for a child his age, as if nutrition had been withheld more often than provided. His little hands were still relaxed, not clenched, suggesting a state of exhaustion or resignation before death. His face, however, told a different kind of story. It was not angry, it was not peaceful. It held an expression that could only be described as acceptance, the expression of someone familiar with suffering. His eyes were open. Those who found him remembered that detail the most. The gaze looked almost alive, almost reaching out, as though he had been waiting for someone to meet his eyes and finally acknowledge he existed. There was no fear left in them, no panic. Instead, there was a haunting calmness that seemed to plead for recognition. Many who later studied the photographs described the same unsettling reaction. It felt as though the child was staring back, not to accuse, but to be remembered. His body was already fading into anonymity, but his eyes resisted, as if refusing to disappear without a trace. This image, more than any forensic detail, immortalized him. It turned him from an unidentified corpse into a symbol of every unheard child hidden behind closed doors, every victim swallowed by silence before anyone knew they were suffering. Silence, however, is rarely accidental. Somewhere near that patch of road lived a family that would later draw suspicion, not because they reported the boy missing, but because they did not report any child missing at all. Their home sat not far from the area where the box was found. Neighbors described the father as harsh, strict, and easily angered. He was a man who seemed to speak more with his presence than his voice, a presence defined by control. The mother, by contrast, was quiet to the point of disappearance. She rarely left the house alone, rarely interacted with others. She seemed to shrink beneath her husband's shadow, existing in quiet compliance. The household was known for its secrecy. People whispered that something was wrong, but no one dared to investigate. In a community valued for its politeness, confrontation was seen as a violation, not a responsibility. Rumors spread that there had been a child in that home who suddenly could no longer be seen. A child who was never enrolled in school and never played outside. Some said the boy was sickly. Others whispered he might not have been the couple's biological child at all. But the most chilling part was not the rumor of his disappearance. It was the realization that no one asked questions when he was gone. The neighbors avoided eye contact when the topic surfaced, as though acknowledging it might implicate them, too. The parents never expressed concern, never sought help, never grieved in public. It was a silence that felt rehearsed, like a script maintained for years. If one listens closely to silence, it can sound like complicity. To understand this environment, one must look at 1950s Philadelphia, where reputation mattered more than truth. Families guarded appearances as fiercely as wealth, terrified that any hint of dysfunction could destroy social standing. Communities seemed warm, yet they relied on silent agreements. You ignore my household, and I ignore yours. The home was treated as untouchable, even when it hid violence. Neighbors smiled in public, then ignored cries behind closed doors, choosing loyalty to secrecy over the safety of a suffering child. This tragedy was not only cultural, it was deeply psychological. Hiding painful truths became a moral shield, a way to protect oneself from responsibility. If people pretended not to see, they could claim they had nothing to answer for. If they insisted on ignorance, guilt could never find them. It was a quiet, comfortable hypocrisy, a community choosing safety over humanity. In such a place, a child like the boy in the box was not only created but erased. He could live without records, schooling, or witness because those around him valued secrecy more than intervention. When he finally surfaced, it was as a discarded body, stripped of identity and dignity. The box held not just a boy, but an accusation. Silence nurtures cruelty. The boy was not only unknown, he was unclaimed. Not because no one knew him, but because someone chose to let him vanish. Someone chose silence over responsibility. And a community allowed that choice to remain unchallenged. Before the cardboard box appeared on that desolate roadside of Philadelphia's woods, the boy had lived like someone who was never meant to exist. No teacher ever called his name. No child in the neighborhood remembered playing with him. There were no medical records under his identity, no vaccination notes, no hospital visits. It was as if the boy had grown up unseen, tucked away where paperwork and witnesses could not follow. His life left no trace, so when he died, it made a terrible kind of sense. How could anyone report a missing child who officially had never been alive? The night before the discovery, a few neighbors recalled hearing a faint cry coming from a nearby house. It wasn't the whiny, impatient cry of a spoiled child. It sounded strained and hoarse, like someone crying through pain, fear, or both. The sound lingered for several minutes, rising and falling in a rhythm that felt desperate, and then, without warning, it stopped. Not faded, not quieted. Just stopped. A silence so absolute that it seemed forceful, as if someone had pressed a hand over a mouth to make sure no more noise escaped. But in 1950s Philadelphia, such things were often dismissed as family matters. Nobody asked questions. People shut their doors, turned their radios up, and let the quiet swallow anything that didn't belong to them. February 25, 1957. A biting wind whipped through the bare winter trees when a college student walked along the edge of the woods, scouting for rabbits to trap. The sky was gray, the air sharp enough to sting skin, and the landscape seemed drained of color. As he moved through the brush, he noticed a cardboard box discarded near the road, its edges wet from melted snow and mud. He might have ignored it. After all, trash appeared in the woods all the time. But something about its size and placement caught his attention. It looked recently placed. Too clean, too deliberate, like trash that didn't belong here. He stepped closer and peered inside. For a second, he couldn't form a single thought. Wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket lay the body of a young boy, curled almost fetal, as if he had been placed there gently, or folded like something someone wanted to hide. The child appeared to be about 4 years old, small, with bruises scattered along his face and torso. His body was painfully thin, ribs visible through pale skin. His hair had been crudely cut, uneven and jagged, like someone had rushed through it with scissors in poor lighting. But the detail that left the deepest scar on all who saw him came from his eyes. They were open, wide, glassy, and staring upward as if still watching someone, maybe the last person he saw before dying. His expression held no surprise, no resistance. Just a strange resignation, as though suffering had been familiar to him long before his final breath. When officers reached the scene, they expected the ground to speak for the crime. Instead, it offered nothing. No footprints surrounded the box except the students'. No tire tracks cut through the dirt. No blood, no drag marks, no indication anyone had fought or even moved there. Only a cardboard box holding a dead boy, left in the stillness of winter, as though the cold itself buried the evidence. One officer noticed something unnerving. The boy's body was too clean. Despite the bruises and injuries, his skin had been washed, nails trimmed, hair freshly cut. Even the blanket, though torn, seemed recently laundered. Someone had cared enough to clean him after death, but not enough to bury him, claim him, or give him a name. While the police canvassed the nearby homes, one resident drew particular attention. He seemed nervous, unusually eager to distance himself from the discovery. When asked if he'd heard anything strange, he stuttered through vague responses and refused to look at the officers directly. When asked whether he knew any child fitting the description, he shook his head too quickly, like someone swatting away a lie before it settled. He avoided any mention of the box entirely. At the time, the police chalked it up to fear or shock. Later, his reaction would become a dark piece in a much larger puzzle. After removing the body, police examined the cardboard box. It had once contained a large shipment of baby furniture. On the side of it was a shipping stamp, a lead, maybe the first real lead. The box had been sent from a local store not far from the wooded area. Investigators raced to the shop, hoping for a name, a receipt, a memory. But the store owner claimed he didn't remember who had purchased it. Dozens of customers had come through. Inventory moved quickly, and the shop kept incomplete records, no signature required for pickup. The box had gone to someone, but no one could recall who. Even more disturbing, investigators checked nearby shipping and delivery points, hoping surveillance might reveal who purchased the box. The closest facility had security cameras that should have captured the transaction. Yet during the exact week the box was sold, those cameras reportedly malfunctioned. All footage from that period was erased, leaving police without what could have been the most crucial evidence. The discovery should have led to answers. Instead, it produced suspicion. A nameless child, washed as if someone cared for him only after death, placed in a cheap cardboard box, discarded in a location chosen not for convenience but for erasure. Nothing about the scene was sloppy. The boy was positioned carefully, his hair recently cut, his body cleaned, his identity removed with precision. Every possible lead, from the vague recollection of where the box might have been bought to the absence of witnesses, the boy's body left the morgue without a name. Investigators, certain that answers must exist somewhere, began the slow excavation of every potential trace he had ever left. They started with fingerprints, hoping at least his identity would surface. In the late 1950s, fingerprint databases were limited, yet the police still attempted what they could. They pressed the dead child's tiny fingers against ink, comparing the imprints with thousands of state records. Every search returned the same result, no match. The child had not attended school, had no birth records, and now even his fingerprints refused to lead anywhere. It was as though the world had been instructed never to record him. While investigators cataloged bruises on his body and collected hair samples, they overlooked something disturbingly simple. The blanket covering him, worn and fraying, was not generic. It belonged to a specific product line sold in just one store in the Philadelphia area. In a case where virtually nothing tied the child to a home, the blanket could have pointed to its origin. But in the chaos of bureaucratic incompetence and a flood of false reports, that clue remained buried in paperwork, forgotten until it was too late to track effectively. No arrests were made, but the police interrogated dozens of families. Some came willingly, offering statements. Others resisted, especially one household living close to where the body was found. The father refused to answer most questions. The mother stayed silent, eyes lowered, hands trembling as though she held on to words she could never dare say aloud. Their neighbors whispered that they were strange, private, and prone to arguments behind closed doors. Yet despite their behavior, the investigation stalled. Suspicion hung over them like frost on the windows, cold and visible, but impossible to grasp. Just as leads began to collapse, the media intervened. Newspapers printed softened reconstructions of the boy's face. Naming him America's unknown child, the title stirred pity, outrage, and a painful question. How could a powerful nation abandon one of its own? Soon, public outrage flooded police departments with letters, tips, and accusations. People mailed in stories about missing cousins, estranged siblings, abandoned children they once knew. Others wrote disturbingly personal letters accusing their own parents, neighbors, and spouses of having something to do with the boy. Some claims were clearly delusional, born out of fear or imagination, but others carried chilling detail. Meanwhile, the neighborhood nearest the crime scene became infamous. Reporters visited homes, asking intrusive questions. Families began locking their doors not out of protection from criminals, but from journalists. The same house that had refused cooperation earlier now faced relentless speculation. The father's stern face appeared in whispered gossip. The mother's timid silence became a symbol of complicity. Whether they were innocent or not, their world shrank under the pressure of public suspicion. And the more isolated they became, the more people believed they were hiding something. With no DNA and almost no physical evidence to work with, the case became a battleground of speculation. Detectives, reporters, and armchair investigators each clung to their own explanations, shaped less by facts than by the fears they carried into the mystery. Theory A, the family murder, the most widely accepted idea, was also the most tragic. The boy, many theorized, had been murdered by someone in his own home. The injuries on his body, the bruises, the signs of neglect, the rushed haircut, pointed toward chronic abuse. He seemed small for his age, suggesting malnutrition. His body had been meticulously cleaned, as though someone cared enough to erase their involvement, yet not enough to bury him with dignity. Perhaps he had been beaten too severely, too many times, and one punishment became fatal. Rather than risk arrest, the family scrubbed the child's body and dumped him in the woods. This theory explained why no one reported him missing. No one wanted him to be found. Theory B, the kidnapped child. Another camp believed the boy was kidnapped, possibly from another state, and later killed to avoid being identified. The lack of records, the attempt to remove his hair quickly, the anonymous abandonment with no clothing, these details felt more like a cover-up than domestic violence to some investigators. If this were true, someone may have stolen the boy, kept him hidden for a time, and ended his life when the threat of discovery loomed. But this theory held a disturbing flaw. If someone kidnapped him, why keep him long enough to starve and bruise him like a long-term prisoner? Was the abduction itself part of a larger, darker secret? Theory C, the temporary guardian. The most unsettling theory suggested the boy had been in the care of someone who was not his parent, a neighbor, a relative, or a family friend who took him in temporarily. Perhaps they were meant to watch the child for a few weeks. Perhaps payment was involved. Something went wrong. An accident, an illness untreated, or abuse that escalated. When the boy died, panic set in. Without legal guardianship, without paperwork, without any way to explain a dead child in their home, the guardian made a horrified choice: get rid of the evidence. This theory did not paint a picture of cruelty, but of fear, a desperate end born not from hatred, but panic. So which story would you believe? Was the boy a victim of a family who hid violence behind closed curtains? Was he a kidnapped child whose past needed to be erased forever? Or was he taken in by someone who meant to save him, only to panic when death came too suddenly? Imagine standing in 1957, with no DNA labs, no digital databases, In 2022, a silence that had lasted more than 6 decades finally broke. DNA technology, the tool investigators of the 1950s could never have imagined, reached into the grave of a nameless child and returned something long denied to him: identity. America's unknown child was no longer a mystery. He had a name. He had belonged to someone. He had once been alive not as a symbol or a case file, but as a boy called Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born in 1953. He was a child who should have been missed, mourned, and protected. Yet the revelation was not the result of a confession or a remorseful witness finally stepping forward. It was not sparked by guilt or memory. It emerged through science, through persistence, through people who refused to let his story fade into dust. His name rose from data and bone, not from family or love. And yet, once uncovered, it brought no closure. The identification brought truth, but not justice. No arrests were made, no charges filed, and those who might have answered for the crime took their silence to the grave. Knowing his name did not solve his death. It only proved that even truth can fail to deliver accountability. Police later revealed that Joseph's parents, now deceased, had already been known to authorities. Yet neither ever reported him missing. His mother offered no alarm, his father never spoke his name, and both continued living behind a culture that valued private homes over a child's safety. Silence became their shield, stronger than any defense in court. In death, they offered no confession, no explanation, only silence. Their voices are gone, but the emptiness they left remains, like a locked door no one can open. Responsibility now rests with those still living. Joseph's siblings refused to speak. Some may have never known he existed, while others may know more than they can bear to reveal. A family that hid him in life continues to hide the truth in death. From a Buddhist view, justice is not limited to punishment. Karma is not a courtroom sentence, but the lingering weight of one's actions and the suffering they create. Even if the one who harmed Joseph escaped earthly judgment, accountability does not disappear. Pain leaves a residue not only on the guilty, but on any society that allowed it to remain unseen. Such consequences continue long after a body is buried, echoing through memory and silence alike. A crime against a child does not disappear with the death of the perpetrator. It lingers like a shadow across the lives of those who ignored the signs, those who chose politeness over intervention, and those who pretended not to hear the cries on the other side of their walls. The legacy of harm becomes something shared, passed down, like an inheritance of shame. What remains is not only the loss of life, but the failure to defend it. Joseph's story challenges the modern idea that justice can only exist if someone is punished. Is justice valid simply because a guilty person goes to prison? Or can justice also be found in the act of remembering a child whom an entire community allowed to disappear? Perhaps justice begins when silence is broken, when a forgotten life is finally acknowledged, when a society admits that it failed someone too small to defend himself. Though his identity is known, the case cannot close with only a name on a grave. Investigators believe the truth may still exist among the living. Joseph's story may survive in scattered memories, siblings with fragments, neighbors who overheard rumors, caregivers who noticed signs yet stayed silent, choosing comfort over intervention. The answers may remain in those who once looked away. If Joseph was informally taken in by someone outside his immediate family, if he was passed quietly between households like an unwanted responsibility, then others may still exist who helped hide a child without fully understanding the consequences. They may not have murdered him, yet they may have enabled the suffering that led to his death. These quiet witnesses represent the last thread leading toward answers. And perhaps the most unsettling question is this: did no one mourn him because no one believed he belonged to them? Joseph's death was not solely the result of one person's cruelty. It was the product of a culture that elevated reputation above responsibility. In the 1950s, secrecy within families was treated as sacred. Neighbors did not interfere in private matters. Screams from behind a door were labeled discipline. Bruises were explained away as clumsy childhood accidents. Communities valued politeness more than protection. A child could starve, suffer, or disappear, and the world would remain respectfully quiet. When a community protects its image more fiercely than its children, it becomes complicit in violence. The abuser never needs to hide. Society hides for them. The crime is not only in the act, it is in the willingness of others to ignore it. And so the boy in the box was not killed only by a person. He was killed by secrecy, by neglect, by the quiet decision of many people to do nothing. His death exposes how a society can destroy a child without ever lifting a hand. Even today, Joseph represents countless children still living in silence. Some are hidden by parents who call suffering discipline. Some are ignored by schools that do not want conflict. Some are overlooked by neighbors who fear being intrusive. Pain continues behind closed doors while communities choose courtesy over conscience. The question Joseph leaves behind is not only who killed him, but why did no one help him? A name now stands on his grave, but it cannot undo what was taken. Joseph lived without protection and died without justice, yet in being remembered, he finally speaks louder than he ever could in life. His story forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. After 65 years of anonymity, the boy in the box finally has a name: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Yet the truth remains incomplete. No arrest has been made. No confession has surfaced. The silence of those who once surrounded him now weighs heavier than any courtroom judgment. His identity offers recognition, but not justice, a reminder that some crimes are not hidden by darkness, but by the quiet acceptance of others. Fear, like a mirror, reveals what we choose to ignore. The pursuit of truth is not only meant to punish the guilty, but to protect those who have yet to be harmed. Every unanswered mystery is a warning. If you found this story meaningful, like, share, and subscribe for more true crime insights. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions. And some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.